I never imagined that my life would end in chains, not of iron or rope, but of words spoken in candlelight, carved into parchment, and bound to the will of a creature older than the stones beneath our village. My name is of no consequence now. What matters is the bargain I struck on a night when despair weighed heavier on me than the mountains surrounding our valley. My younger brother lay in fevered torment for weeks, his body wasting away by the day. The village healers muttered of plague, of curses, of God's punishment, but none of their herbs or prayers brought him peace. His skin grew pallid, his eyes darkened, and when he slept, his breath rattled like dry leaves caught in the wind. Some nights, he would whisper in a tongue I did not know, words guttural and sharp, words that made the crucifix above our hearth shiver on its nail. The villagers stopped coming to our cottage. Mothers pulled their children away when I passed, and old men spat on the ground, murmuring that my family was marked. I buried my shame beneath anger, but inside I knew they were right. Something unnatural had taken hold of my brother, something beyond my reach. And I, his only kin, was powerless. It was then that he came. The storm that night was unlike any I had ever seen. Thunder that shook the soil, rain that turned the roads to rivers, and lightning that carved jagged scars across the sky. I had gone out to fetch water, though why I left the cottage in such weather I cannot say. Perhaps some instinct guided me, a whisper urging me toward the old ruins that stood on the edge of the forest. The villagers claimed those stones were remnants of a monastery abandoned centuries ago, swallowed by moss and ivy, a place where no birds sang and no cattle grazed. I found him there, or perhaps he found me. A tall figure cloaked in shadow, his face half hidden beneath a hood, though the glimmer of his eyes pierced the dark like twin embers. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and measured, each word carrying a weight that pressed against my chest. He knew my name. He knew my brother's name. He spoke of the boy's illness as though he had watched it unfold through the very walls of our cottage. And then he offered me what no priest or healer could: salvation. Your brother's soul hangs between two hungers, he told me. The hunger of the grave and the hunger of my kind. I can call him back from the edge, keep his heart beating, his blood warm. But nothing comes without a price. I knew what he was. Every tale whispered by the hearth since childhood spoke of creatures that stalked the night, drinking the blood of men, damning them to half-lives of shadow. My grandmother called them strigoi, others Nosferatu, but the word mattered little. The truth stood before me and the truth had teeth. Still I listened. Because when a man watches the last of his family wither, when he wakes each night to the sound of a loved one choking on his own breath, the heart grows deaf to warnings. Hope is a crueler poison than despair, and I drank it eagerly. His terms were simple in their cruelty: I would enter his service. Not for a day nor a season, but until he released me, or until my blood no longer pleased him. He would spare my brother from the full transformation, keep him in a fragile balance so long as I obeyed. If I faltered, if I resisted, the boy's fate would be sealed. In that storm-lit ruin I swore myself to him. He drew forth a sheet of yellowed parchment, inked with words in Latin and symbols I did not understand. His hand, pale and cold, guided mine as I signed. The ink bled like fresh blood across the page. When the bargain was sealed, he smiled, and the sight of his teeth nearly drove me to flee. Yet I did not. For my brother's sake, I bowed my head and accepted the title he gave me. Not servant. Not vassal. Slave. And with the first cock's crow he brought me to his castle. A fortress of black stone that crowned the cliffs above our valley, its spires clawing at the heavens, its windows blind with age. The villagers avoided the road that led there, but I walked it under his gaze, each step pulling me farther from the man I had been, deeper into the shadow I had chosen. When we reached the gates, he pressed a scroll into my hands. Read these carefully, he said. These are the laws by which you will live. Break them, and you doom yourself and your brother alike. I did not yet know it, but those rules were not mere orders. They were chains. Chains that bound me tighter than any dungeon could. The castle swallowed me whole. Its gates closed behind us with a groan like dying metal, and I felt the weight of centuries pressed down on my shoulders. The air within the courtyard was colder than the storm outside, as though the stones themselves exhaled frost. Ivy crawled up the walls like veins across pale flesh, and above, black towers rose so high they seemed to pierce the clouds. Inside, the corridors twisted endlessly, lined with portraits whose painted eyes followed me no matter where I turned. Cobwebs trembled in corners, disturbed not by wind, but by something moving in the walls. Once, as we passed a long gallery, I thought I saw a pale hand withdraw from between the stones, fingers long and thin as bones, but when I blinked it was gone. He led me to a chamber lit only by a single iron candelabrum. The light trembled across banners tattered with age, their colors faded, their sigils long unrecognizable. In the center stood a table of dark oak, upon which rested a scroll bound in red ribbon. The vampire gestured toward it with a hand that looked carved from marble. "These are your laws now," he said, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "They are not suggestions. They are survival." I hesitated before untying the ribbon, but the weight of his gaze forced my hands forward. The parchment was brittle, stained with rings of old wax and smears that might have been blood. The writing was a mixture of Latin, Hungarian, and a script I could not decipher, curling symbols that made my stomach knot. Some passages were scrawled by different hands, each line older than the last, amended over centuries. I began to read them aloud, and each word felt heavier than the one before. Rule 1. You shall not leave these walls without his blessing. Beyond them, the world will forget you, and even the sun itself will turn against you. Rule 2. You shall not open the shutters, nor gaze upon dawn from within these halls. Light is poison here, and it will betray you both. Rule 3. If you hear his voice calling from the crypt beneath, you must not descend, for he does not call from there. Rule 4. You shall not look upon the mirrors in the upper hall after midnight, for they are no longer faithful glass but windows into places best left unseen. Rule 5. When the iron bells toll 3 times at nightfall, you shall bow your head and remain silent until the echoes fade. If you speak, the castle itself will answer. Rule 6. No food or drink shall pass your lips within these walls unless he himself permits it. To taste otherwise is to share in a hunger that is not yours. Rule 7. At dusk you will tend to his table, and at dawn you will cleanse the hall. Do not linger after your duties, and do not question the stains that refuse to wash away. Rule 8. If footsteps follow you in the passages, you must not turn. To acknowledge them is to invite them. Rule 9. Should there be knocking at the gate or door during the dark hours, you must not answer, no matter how desperate the pleas may sound. Rule 10. If your brother's voice calls to you in the night, you must resist. He will not be there, only the shadow of what he might become. Rule 11. Each dawn before you rest, you will kneel before the crucifix in the east wing and pray aloud. Though it burns him, it binds you. Omit this and you will learn why chains of faith are still chains. Rule 12. Above all, you will not question his will. To doubt is to weaken him, and in his weakness your brother will fall. My lips grew dry as I traced each line. The words were rules, yes, but they carried the weight of curses, each one a prison cell locking tighter around me. As I read the last line aloud, I swore the candles dimmed, as though the ink itself devoured the light. When I looked up, the vampire was watching me with a thin smile. His eyes, black as onyx, reflected nothing of the candle's glow. You will memorize them, he said. Carve them into your bones if you must. Obey, and your brother lingers at the threshold, neither taken by the grave nor claimed by my kin. Defy and he is lost. I wanted to ask how he could keep my brother alive, how he held such power over a boy who had never harmed anyone. But when my tongue rose with the question, my throat closed and I realized I had no voice. The vampire's smile widened. He leaned close, his breath cold as winter earth. It is not mercy that binds me to this pact, he whispered. It is necessity. You will understand in time. Then he dismissed me with a flick of his hand, as though I were a servant already well trained. Another door opened behind me, not by hand but on its own, grinding across the stone floor, leading into the servants' quarters. As I stepped through, parchment still trembling in my grip, I understood. This was no contract to protect my brother. This was the cage of a beast, and I had just stepped willingly inside. The first night began with silence. A silence so deep it pressed against my ears, as though the castle itself were holding its breath. I had been led to a narrow room in the servants' quarters, no larger than a stable stall, its walls bare stone, its floor scattered with straw that smelled faintly of mildew. Sleep did not come easily. The parchment of laws burned in my mind, each line carving itself deeper into me. When the iron bells tolled in the distance, I remembered the command. Bow your head, remain silent, let the echoes pass. 3 times the sound rang through the halls, a groaning resonance that shook dust from the beams. I froze in the dark, holding my breath until the last vibration died. A whisper stirred against the door as if the castle itself was listening, waiting for me to speak. I dared not. That was the first time I felt the rules not as words but as chains. At dusk, I served him as the scroll demanded. I set the table in the great hall, its ceiling lost in shadows, chandeliers trembling with countless unlit candles. He sat at the far end, his pale face emerging from the gloom as though the dark itself had shaped him. He ate nothing, though platters of meat and bread lay untouched before him. Taste nothing unless I offer it, the parchment had warned, and though hunger gnawed at me, I kept my hands still at my sides. I thought of my brother then and swallowed the bitterness in my throat. Later, as I carried a basin to cleanse the floor at dawn, I noticed stains near the hearth, dark, stubborn marks sunk deep into the stone. They would not yield to water or cloth no matter how hard I scrubbed. I remembered the words, "Do not question the stains that refuse to wash away." So I worked in silence, though the smell that rose from the floor was coppery and sweet, like old blood. On the second night, as I walked the corridor with a lantern in hand, I felt the weight of footsteps behind me. Soft at first, then heavier, as if someone followed no more than a pace away. My heart thundered, and the urge to turn nearly broke me. But the law hissed in my mind, "If footsteps follow you, do not turn." So I fixed my eyes on the wall ahead, whispering a prayer under my breath. The sound trailed me until I reached the stairs, then vanished, leaving only the cold. By the third night, the castle had begun to show me its cruelty. Near midnight, a knock rattled the main gate. I froze in the hall, every instinct screaming to answer, to free whoever begged from the storm outside. The blows came again, louder this time, accompanied by a voice, a woman's voice, pleading for help, sobbing, promising she had lost her way in the mountains. My hand hovered near the iron bolt, and for a moment I thought of opening it. Then the law returned, "Do not answer no matter how desperate the pleas." I stepped back, clutching the lantern so hard my knuckles whitened. The sobbing ceased at once, replaced by laughter, thin, high, and mocking, fading into the distance until it was swallowed by the wind. But the cruelest test came when I heard my brother. His voice echoed down the passage, weak and trembling, calling my name. I dropped the cloth I had been carrying, my heart hammering in my chest. "Help me," he cried. "Please, I'm cold. Please come." I almost ran to him. Every part of me screamed to follow the sound, to tear through walls if I must. Yet the parchment's words cut deeper than love. If your brother's voice calls to you, resist, for it is not him but the shadow of what he may become. I pressed my back to the wall, tears burning my eyes, and forced myself to remain where I was until the voice died away, leaving me hollow and shaking. By dawn, I fell to my knees before the crucifix in the east wing, just as commanded. The cold stone bit into my flesh, and the words of the prayer stumbled from my lips. Behind me, I heard him moving in the shadows, pacing like a wolf. The prayer made the air heavy, pressing between us like a wall. I felt his hatred for it, but also his need. The chain bound me, yes, but it bound him as well. And so the nights went on, each one a slow torture of obedience. With every duty, every silence, every restraint, I felt less like a man and more like the ghost of a man, surviving only by clinging to rules carved into my very bones. I told myself it was for my brother, that his life was the price of my servitude. But in the stillness of the corridors, in the echo of footsteps that did not belong to me, I began to wonder if my brother was already gone, and if what I served was nothing but a lie designed to keep me chained in the jaws of a starving beast. The nights had ground me down into obedience, yet obedience taught me something the parchment had never intended. It revealed the seams in his power. Each rule that had once terrified me began to expose its purpose. They were not sacred laws, but barricades against his own weakness. The bells, the mirrors, the footsteps in the dark, all were not for my protection but for his survival. The truth came like a wound when I found the hidden files beneath the chapel steps. The liquid inside was the same he gave my brother, the same that kept him pale and trembling. It was no cure. It was a sickness carefully measured, a leash tied around his throat. The vampire had never saved him. He had poisoned him, just as he had poisoned every soul who had ever sworn to serve him. That was why there had been so many rules, so many desperate servants before me. He needed them alive, obedient, but weakened enough to never resist. He needed them to last because he himself no longer could. That night I saw his mask falter. His hands shook as he lifted his goblet, and when the prayer reached his lips, it caught in his throat like ash. His shadow seemed thinner than before, his steps slower. The predator who once moved like smoke now trembled like a man. In that moment I understood. He was starving not for lack of prey but because his own decay was swallowing him. I waited for the hour between midnight and dawn, when his strength ebbed lowest. My brother lay fevered but still clinging to life. I carried him in my arms, his breath shallow against my chest. The corridors seemed to shift, the portraits watching, the stones listening. Footsteps rose behind us, heavy and close, but I did not turn. The law whispered in my mind, "Never look back," and for once, the rule that enslaved me kept me alive. At the main gate, the iron bolt resisted. My heart hammered as if it too were bound, but the storm outside had swollen the wood, and with one final heave it gave way. The night air struck like cold water. Fog lay heavy across the valley, muffling the world. I stepped into it, clutching my brother, and the castle groaned behind us as if mourning a meal it would never taste. He did not follow. Perhaps he was too weak. Perhaps he knew pursuit would break him. Or perhaps he smiled in his chamber, certain that even free of his walls, I would never be free of his rules. We stumbled across the moors until the first smear of dawn touched the horizon. My brother stirred weakly in my arms, his eyes fluttering, the fever still in him but no longer fed. For the first time since I had bound myself to the vampire's will, I felt the smallest spark of hope. And yet, even as the sun rose, I could still hear the echo of the laws in my mind. They whispered in the hush of morning, reminding me that monsters do not always break chains. Sometimes they forge them, rule by rule, prayer by prayer, until you cannot tell obedience from survival. But I remembered, and in remembering I escaped.